What the world needs right now are more storytellers. You know that humans have the unique ability to form sentences and language like no other creature. For that part, we exist in part to tell stories. Life is a story that unfolds right before us every day. And when we understand the enduring truths of life, we start to see what pleasure and love and pain is and suffering. Shakespeare once said that all the world is a stage and we're just merely players. And it's because he understood a truth about stories. And I came to love stories through a storyteller who was close to me many years ago. And he came from the Philippines, and he was an old man, and his name was Eustaquio. Eustace, for short. And Eustaquio grew up in the heart of the Philippines on an island where he was growing sugarcane with his family that was poor as can be. And they had raised sugarcane with a plow and a handheld scythe, and he worked hard. During the days he'd go to school, and afterwards his chores were to go out in the fields. He did this every day in the hot, blistering sun. And he hated it. You would too, right? It's hard. But he had a dream. He had a dream that one day he could go to the big city, he could find a job, go to college, and somehow live somewhere else. But his parents had another idea. He said, no. We're too poor for you to go to college. You've got to work here, just like all your other brothers and sisters. None of them went to college. And at some point, he had a brother who moved away to a southern island in Mindanao. And that brother didn't go to college, but he at least left the tiny village. And so we looked up to him. And so after school one day, instead of coming home, Eustaquio decided to run away. So we went all the way down south. He found refuge with his brother until word got back to the village where he was. And his mother and father sent Brother Claudio over to pick him up. So Brother Claudio came and dragged him back, plopped him down back to mother, father, and they said, damn it, you stubborn kid. You belong here. You got to work here on the farm. We're too poor for you to go to college. That's not for you. So he went silent. For 2 years, he finished up high school. And he wrapped that up so that he'd be able to do something. Because while he was working out in the fields, he was plotting. He was plotting for the day when he decided that he was going to run away again. So he ran, and he ran, and he ran, like Forrest Gump. Until he showed up in Manila, where he found a job, and he worked himself through college. And he only returned back to the village to say goodbye for a last time. And that was because he was going to the United States, because he had a job. I know this story so much because Eustaquio was my father. And he told me this story hundreds of times. I've heard it over and over and over again, ever since I was a kid. And within that is a treasure chest of truth about hard work, about dedication, about sacrifice, about living a dream. And that's what story can do. My father knew a truth about storytelling, that stories are the DNA of our values, our cultures, our beliefs. And we pass on that to our children and future generations by telling them stories. My dad is why I came to love storytelling. I went to school as a writer, as a communicator, and then I came out of that. I went into the corporate world and started working, and now I've dedicated my life to stories and telling and teaching people about stories and the community about stories. I had the opportunity to bring my father back to the Philippines just a few years ago. That's where this picture came from. And the first thing he told me was that we're walking amongst the sugar fields, and there's a dirt road, and as far as the eye can see, and he says, it hasn't changed after 50 years. And in the distance came two figures, an old man who was wrinkled and worn and haggard, and his son. And as they came closer and closer, I started to see that I was looking in a mirror of my father and myself, of the life that I could have been living. And as my cousin and my Uncle Claudio alongside of him, my cousin climbed up a 30-foot tall coconut tree. With a machete in hand, he was chopping coconuts down. It all became clear to me suddenly why my father left that place. Because he wanted to create a better life for not just himself, but he did it for his family. And he did it for me. He did it for me. And that's why I love stories. Okay. And nowadays we hear people say, what's in a story? Everybody's talking about story now. Business should be a story. That media and advertising should contain stories in it. But what goes into a story? And I think we can find a little bit about this in a mythologist by the name of Joseph Campbell studied stories for a number of years in the 20th century. And what he did was he traveled the world and studied mythologies and legends. And what he found was that every great story ever told, it starts off with this hero figure. And what the hero does is he's likable, he's reluctant, he's called to this adventure in life where he has to face great peril and obstacles that stand in his way in order to find a great treasure. It's hero, obstacle, treasure. And that's true of Lord of the Rings, it's true of Odysseus in the Odyssey, it's true of Hamlet, it's true of Frodo, it's true of Star Wars, it's true of Dorothy. That pattern is in most great stories, all the good ones at least. And what we find, this is remarkable human insight about this, is that when a hero goes through the journey and faces great peril and obstacles, we have this empathic response with that figure. We feel the struggle and the pain and the heartache. We feel the conflict in their hearts, in our hearts. And that phenomenon is something that psychologists and philosophers and religious scholars as well as evolutionists have been thinking and looking for many years. Why does this have such an effect on us? And it's because that the conflict in those gives us empathy. It's conflict. The great storyteller Robert McKee says that stories are a metaphor for life. And to be alive, to feel alive, means that we are in perpetual conflict. But for some reason, we hate conflict, don't we? We avoid it like the plague. We'd much rather live a whitewashed life where we go to work, we come home, we park in our 2-car garage, a white picket fence, we pet our dog, we have dinner, and make sure that you turn the DVR on so I could watch Downton Abbey. But that's not life, is it? That's not real life. You know what real life is? Real life is the mother who's been diagnosed with cancer, and she's struggling under chemo treatments, losing her hair, hoping for just a few more weeks to be with her 3 small children. Real life is that phone call you get at 2 a.m., and the trembling voice on the other end says, "There's been an accident. You better come quick." Real life is the text message you got from your sister who's just moved herself across country to be with her husband and her family. And the text says, "He's having an affair, and he's left me." Conflict is part of real life. And what conflict does for us as heroes, for people, is it causes them to step up, rise to the occasion, and fight for everything that's good in this world. That's real life. That's conflict. And all of us are facing conflict in our societies today. We see it in gangs and violence and drugs, prostitution, trafficking. It's all happening right before our eyes. And most of you here volunteers for some reason. Maybe you've taken up a cause. What we find is that when community builders and leaders take up causes, it's usually because of a personal conflict, something that's very close to them. So let me tell you about what that is for me. When I was 6 years old, I was in the schoolyard, in the playground of a Catholic schoolyard. And as I was sitting there, an older boy came up. He pointed me out, called me out amongst all these people. He said, "You slanty-eyed gook, why don't you go back home to your own country?" And as a first grader, you hear those words and you're confused. You don't know what's going on. Because I was born here. I deserve to be here, just like everybody else. But as I got onto the bus and I came home and there's tears in my eyes and they slipped off the bus into my mother's arms and she held me close, comforted me like a good mother does. She told me she loved me. You see, conflict evokes empathy. Conflict is not just the catalyst for story. It's not the reason why it drives story. It drives story because we have empathy for the character. That's real life. Empathy is simply the ability to feel another human being's emotions. And what we need to teach kids these days is empathy. I think about this kid, this 8-year-old, this brat, snot-nosed brat. Right? I could vilify him, I could demonize him, I could call him names, I could call him a bully. All that matters. But society, we call it a bullying problem, right? But we don't have a bullying problem in life. We actually have an empathy problem. Because if you think about it, if this kid understood what I was going through and how I felt and how those words might affect me, then he wouldn't have done it. I suppose, and I think about that kid and I wonder, maybe his father was an alcoholic and from the Vietnam War, and he lost his arm in the war, and he came home, and out of self-hatred and pity, he beat his son every day. And he ranted incessantly about how Asian people were taking over the world. Empathy is really what story is all about. But the problem that we have today is that we're not telling enough stories. We live in a world where we consume as much as 15 hours of media a day. A UC San Diego study just came out with this back in November. So 15 hours that we're spending on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Pinterest. And there's a reason why Facebook calls it a storyline, right? There are all types of stories. Right? And then we go home and then we binge watch the Breaking Bad and Walking Dead and Downton Abbey, Orange is the New Black, House of Cards, House, you name it. Whatever your favorite show. We do what we do best. We consume. But we don't know how to tell anymore. And that's my fear, is that we've lost the art of telling a good story. And what does it take to come back to story? I think that storytellers are the natural leaders and mentors of our society. And we need to come back to it. Let me tell you about my final story about a storyteller that I came to know through the work that I do. His name is Joseph. And Joseph is a young man now, but he was a boy who started off as a 6-year-old living in a homeless shelter with his 2 sisters and a single mother who was abandoned by their father. And with no dignity or a place to even call home, he stayed there for his first grade. When he was 8 years old, he was shot for the first time walking the streets during one of our darkest hours in the city of the 2001 riots. His mother decided to move them up to a place up here, actually right down the road a few blocks from here, in order to get them away from that conflict and violence. And she moved him up here, and at the age of 12, she was diagnosed with cancer. And the last thing she told him, she said, "Joseph, you need to be a man. You got to take care of your sisters." And as he internalized that, the scared boy had no one to turn to, and a shadowy figure came out from the shadows into the streets. And he offered him a quick fix out of this mess. And with a desperate hand, he reached out to this man, and this man gave him a gun, a wad of cash, and a bag of dope. So in the 6th grade, Joseph was going to school, doing math problems during the day, and then after school, he was slinging dope on the streets. And he did this for 3 or 4 years, all to provide for his family. He was a boy masquerading as a man with a gun. But really, he was a boy living a nightmare. And during that time, he shot at people, he got into fights, he sold crack to children, he hurt people, his gang might have murdered others. And if it wasn't for one evening, open up, police! In a mad scramble, he jumped out a 2-story window, and he was the only one standing. Everyone else in his gang was either dead, they were locked up, or in jail. And Joseph had enough. Enough was enough. And with no one else to turn to, an old preacher saw him, and he had compassion for Joseph. And he took him in under his wing, and he decided that he was going to help him out. He tutored him, he helped him with his GED, and he gave him a job in a community center where he could help other kids. So Joseph started telling his story to other kids who were faced with that same dilemma that he had. And as he told his story to many of these children, 12 years old, 13 years old, one of them recognized him, in fact. And he said, "Hey, I know you. You're the guy who used to sell crack to my mama." And Joseph said, "Not anymore. Not anymore." And that's the story of Joseph. The boy who lost his mother, the boy who became drug dealer, the boy who lost everything, and the boy who was taken in by someone who cared, who told him a story and gave him a new beginning. We need storytellers more than ever to tell great stories. As leaders, and you are leaders in this room, stories can be the Trojan horse of your vision for a brighter future. That's the power of stories. And you've all gone through hell at some point. We've all gone through an abyss in our lives. And now we're sitting on these wonderful treasures to share with other people if we just open ourselves to that. We need mentors to step up, to rise up to the occasion, to share that story, not be afraid to share the story. Because when you share the story, it's a sword. It's the elixir. A hero's journey is complete when a hero finally tells the story and shares the reward with everyone. That's when a hero's journey is complete. So I want you to look around you, look to your left, look to your right. These people are all sitting on treasures, and they want to tell their story, and they want you to hear it. And may the goal of your story, may it be that the heart response from somebody is, "You're just like me." Because once you've done that, that's when you know your story's connected. That's when you know you've inspired someone. That's when you know you're speaking with courage. Nelson Mandela once said that we should speak to the hearts and not to the minds. And you all have the power to do that today. All you have to do is tell your story. So tell your story. Thank you very much.